Alright, I have exactly 17.5 minutes, so we'll have to do this expeditiously. You know, I don't think I've ever failed a TBR as spectacularly as I did this one. Have you ever been in a situation where the task at hand was so insurmountable and impossible to achieve that you kind of just gave up and did whatever you wanted instead? Yeah, that's pretty much what I did in January. If you've missed my January TBR, you've missed a lot. Literally. I had so many books on it that I don't even remember all of them, and definitely did not read all of them. Frankly, I didn't even read half. And I'm not sorry, there's only so many hours in a day and I had a very busy month. Now, justifications out of the way, let's look at the TBR I was working with. We had Hyperion by Simmons, which was a TBR jar pick, The Crimson Campaign by Brian McClellan, which was a series-style landing, The Starless Crown by James Rollins, which was a bookshelf jar pick, Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, which was a prompt cards pick to read a memoir/autobiography, A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, which was a prompt cards pick to read a library book, Down by Chuck Palahniuk, which was another prompt cards pick to read the lowest rated book on my TBR, The Vagrant by Peter Newman, which was another bookshelf jar pick, Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas, which was a prompt cards pick to read a paperback, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larson, which was another bookshelf jar pick. I guess you can see the trend here. Forevermore by Cindy Miles, which was a TBR jar pick, Inferno by Dante Alighieri, which was a prompt cards pick to read a hardback, the title of which starts with a vowel, and Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, which was a free choice for completing the map. On top of that, I had An Echo of Things to Come, which was left over from basically November. So a total of 13 books, some of which should frankly be counted as 2 considering their size. And not a half a chance in hell I could have read them all. I think I only finished 4 of them, plus surprisingly 2 that were not on this list. Stick around to find out. As always, let's start with the casualties. The Starless Crown by James Rollins. This is an adult epic fantasy that comes up on my TBR for the second time in the span of I think 6 months, and I didn't read it again. I promise the third time it lands, I'm gonna go for it. I just didn't have the time or the energy. Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. I was very curious about this autobiography, but to be honest with you, in January, I just kind of wanted to read fiction only, so I didn't want to waste this book on a month that I wouldn't have appreciated it as much. Damned by Chuck Palahniuk, yet another book that I was very excited about because it was recommended to me by a friend who's never misled me, but I didn't have the mental capacity or the energy to pay enough attention to it, I don't think. And it's one of those books that really I think would influence me emotionally, and I wasn't ready for that, so I decided to leave it for another time. The Vagrant by Peter Newman. Frankly, I'd forgotten that this book was on my TBR, much like I'd forgotten that I owned it when it came on said TBR. And before I got to it, I'd read 2 other sci-fis in the month of January, so I decided to leave it for another time. I wasn't feeling like it, and I really like the cover, so I want to give it the time of day. I keep on saying that, I couldn't get to it. Okay, so this is another one that's going to be read another time. Forevermore by Cindy Miles. This is a book that was recommended to me by one of my subscribers, which is why it was in the TBR jar, and I didn't even know what it was until I saw the cover after I filmed the TBR and realized that it was a romance. And to be honest with you, I didn't feel on a romantic wave in January, so I couldn't get to it. And because it's a book recommended by a subscriber, I really want to give my full attention to it, which is why I'm actually planning on reading it in February. And the last book that I didn't get to at all was Dante's Inferno, which is actually a reread for me, so I didn't really prioritize it. I mostly wanted to read it because of this beautiful edition that I own with illustration from Gustave Doré, and I leaf through it every now and then and enjoyed them, so not a big deal, but I will reread it one day again. And as for the books that I'm still reading, we have Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson yet again. I don't think I opened it once in January. I wasn't feeling like it. I think I mentioned in my last wrap-up video that I'm a little disappointed by the book and kind of hesitant to continue reading it, and I will continue reading it probably in the coming month or the one after that. We'll see. I don't want to give promises that I'm not going to keep, but I'm still considering it as a book that I'm actively reading, and I'm hoping to finish one of the coming months. Now, for another book that I was actively reading and decided to drop out of the roster completely, at least for the time being, we have An Echo of Things to Come by James Allington. This is an adult epic fantasy in the second book in the Lycanius trilogy that really doesn't have much luck with me because this book came on the TBR some time ago, and instead of reading it, I decided to reread the first book from the series because I'd forgotten pretty much everything about it. And now when it came again, I started reading it, and then I don't think I opened it for the past 2 months at all. So I'm just gonna drop it for now and hopefully read it another time because I don't want to have it hanging over my head, you know? So as you can see, the situation is beyond tragic, though I'm still kind of happy with what I read in January. So let's go through the books that I finished in the order in which I finished them. Starting with Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. This is a new adult epic fantasy and the 4th book in the Throne of Glass series. Now, if you know anything about me, you probably know that I'm not big on romantic fantasy books and that I'm not the biggest fan of Sarah J. Maas. I can appreciate her talent generally speaking, but I read the ACOTAR twice and I wasn't very impressed with it. So safe to say that I was biased when I started reading this series, and finishing book 1, I wasn't too impressed either. I thought it was okay, and I continued with the series just because I was buddy reading it with a friend. Now the second book I quite enjoyed. I could see the story starting to become more deep and I started to like the characters a little bit more, and then book 3 impressed me yet again, even though it introduced a romance that I could never get behind. So getting to book 4, I was liking the series, but it wasn't my favorite or anything, and I have to admit it, I was biased against the author. I was kind of looking down my nose at the series, and I was frankly trying to nitpick. And would you believe me that despite all of that, I had to give the book 5 stars. It's perfect, okay? It's a perfect book. For what it is, it couldn't have been done better. I really liked the relationships that were introduced, especially between the female characters, the meetings, the plot lines, the way that the story is unfolding. I think it was all done perfectly. There were so many satisfying conclusions, and not just satisfying because of where they ended, but because of the way they were written. It all made so much sense, and it meant something every single time. Not to give any spoilers, but in this book, our main female character meets my favorite female character, and their interaction was just chef's kiss. Then we had one murder that was done by another female character, even though we expected it to be done by our main female character, and it was again perfect because it meant so much. Honestly, when I read it, I just wanted to stand up and clap. And then there was one particular sacrifice towards the end of the book that was also fantastic. Just everything that the author put on page was damn near perfect. The one thing I had as a complaint was this portrayal of masculinity that I think the author finds attractive for some reason, where 2 alpha male would enter a room and immediately start growling at each other because there is a female present as well. I don't understand this, okay? I know for a fact that this is attractive to some women, and maybe this is gonna sound narrow-minded of me, but I think if you've ever dealt with a man like that in real life, you could never find this attractive. Ever. It's cringy and it's uncomfortable and I don't like it, but luckily for me, it was a very minuscule part of this book and I could easily ignore it. So I really enjoyed the book. I gave it 5 stars, and I highly recommend this series. The second book that I finished in January was Hyperion by Simmons. This is an adult classic sci-fi and the first book in the Hyperion Canto series, or just Hyperion, not 100% sure. The book is again a recommendation by a subscriber of mine. I think they go by Rui Sci-Fi on Instagram, and boy, did I love this book. It tells the story of several strangers who are selected for some reason to go on a pilgrimage, is that the word, to the planet Hyperion and talk to this entity who is called the Shrike. Now, this whole expedition is really unusual, so during the course of their travel, they decide to share their stories so that they can figure out why they have been selected. And of course, we are introduced to their stories one by one, and each of those stories was absolutely fantastic. From about page 4 of this book, I couldn't put it down, and I was obsessively reading it for the 3 days that it took me to finish it, and I was working during that time as well. The book is so well written and so mysterious and so addictive, and every single story here had so much meaning, especially the story of the scientist and his daughter. Let me tell you, 7 paragraphs into his story, I already suspected what was going to happen to him, and I was still heartbroken when it did, and it was just so good. It was perfect. I highly recommend it. The only thing I didn't like was the fact that it ended on a very serious cliffhanger, but I understand why it needed to end there, so I'm not mad. I gave it 5 stars. And thank you to Rue Sci-Fi for this fantastic recommendation. I can understand why this is your favorite book, and you have a great taste. The third book that I finished in January was A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martin. This was yet another adult sci-fi and the first book in the Gallant series. The setup for this book is very interesting. It happens many years into the future when humanity has moved on to other planets after Earth has been destroyed by them. We have the Empire, which is under the rule of an emperor, and we have a group of separatists that live on a mining space station and don't want to be ruled by said empire. They do have a political relationship though, so those separatists send an ambassador to the empire. And the book starts and is being told from the point of view of a new ambassador that is being sent to the empire after the old ambassador has died under mysterious circumstances. So basically we end up having a very political murder mystery investigation in space, though technically it happens on a planet. I don't really know what to think about this book, to be honest with you, because generally I very much enjoyed it, but I found the writing style very difficult to get into. And I can't put my finger on anything specific. It wasn't too flowery, it wasn't too complicated, it just didn't read smoothly. I was having a hard time imagining some of the places, some of the people. It just wasn't jiving with me at all. Now granted, I read some of this book in Bulgarian because I picked it up from the library and I was struggling so much that I ended up getting it as an ebook in English, and it got a little bit better, but not by much. One of the things that I could definitely point out as very frustrating was how some of the characters were named. In the Gallant Empire, every single person has a name that starts with a number and then some sort of an object. And the combination of those was creating such an annoyance to me, especially in Bulgarian, which is a very descriptive language, and sometimes in order to say 1 or 2 words, we need to use full sentences. So it was kind of bloating the book, creating this sort of unnecessary noise, and generally making the reading experience very uncomfortable. I also don't think that the dialogue was flowing very well. I didn't always get the meaning of what the characters were trying to say to each other or the jokes that they were making. I basically couldn't pick up the mood of a conversation based on the words that were written. And granted, English is not my mother tongue, but it was the same with the Bulgarian version of the book, and I generally haven't had an issue like that in the past. On top of that, I didn't really like the climax of the ending. I liked the idea behind it and I liked how we got there, but the climax itself seemed a little too fantasy for me. Given the whole previous context of the book, it just didn't feel like it fit well. Other than that, it wasn't a bad book. There were some moments where I was really invested into the book, and I think I'm going to continue with the series. I gave it 3.2 stars. The next book I finished in January was Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a very popular Russian classic, and I have a full video about it, which I will link over here if you'd like to watch it. I'm not going to say too much about this book. It was a very interesting reading experience. I'm very happy I read it. I gave it 5 stars, and I highly recommend it. After that, I finished The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larson. This is an adult murder mystery / thriller and the first book in the Millennium series. I'm having a bit of a difficult time as to how to summarize this book because there's so much going on. We have financial crime, an actual disappearance of a person, a bunch of murders, some history, some political maneuvering, a bunch of other crimes that I don't even want to talk about, and the book has so many twists and turns. I probably even forgot a bunch of them. So I'm not going to do any summary of it. You can go and read a synopsis online, but I'm going to tell you that this is a very intriguing read and very complicated one too. It's a baffling combination of edge of your seat moments and so much exposition. Like the author would give so much detailed information step by step about financial and political moves in the 20th century Europe, especially after the World War. And while I understand why this was important for the story, it was kind of making it really heavy and kind of pulling the focus from the main plot line. On the other hand, I learned very interesting things about the financial world and the world of banking and the world of journalism especially. Granted, that was mostly applicable to the analog era when the internet was not as prevalent and social media was not a thing. But it still piqued my curiosity and I was very glad to learn about it. Now, one thing you need to know about this book is that it's very brutal. It doesn't pull its punches, especially when it comes to violence of any sort. There are detailed graphic scenes here that left me so very uncomfortable that I actually had to put the book down and kind of cool off before I picked it up again. And I would like to underline again how heavy it is on the information dump, especially in the beginning. So if you find yourself bored and kind of uninterested, please don't let that stop you. You can skim through things if you wish, but continue reading it because it definitely is worth it. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many twists in this book, and some of them are so very twisty that I'm not 100% sure that I got the resolution resolution of them entirely, but I was very impressed. And I generally had a very good time with this book, so I gave it 4 stars, and I'm definitely continuing with the series. And the last book that I finished in January was The Gallant by Janny Wurts. This is an adult epic fantasy novella and the prequel to the Wars of Light and Shadow series. Why I decided to read this is because in January I was actually participating in a buddy read for the first book from the series, The Curse of the Mistwright, which is organized by John from Talking Story. I will link his channel and all the rest of the amazing booktubers that are participating in the video description. And in February, I think on the 12th, we will have a live show on John's channel where we'll be discussing the book alongside the author. And when the time starts approaching, I'll probably post about it on one of my social medias. So that's the reason why I picked up The Gallant, and I read it within a day because it's very short, I think only slightly above 100 pages, and I was so very impressed. This is a very, very short story, but it got me so very invested in the characters that I was following. It has a bit of a tragic ending that got me very emotional, that was very unexpected, and I really, really liked it. And if there's one thing that I could put as criticism is that the writing style is a bit difficult to get into, but once you do, it actually becomes very easy to continue reading. It's just every time I would put the book down and have to pick it up again, I'd need like 2-3 minutes in order for my brain to kind of adjust to the language that the author uses. Don't get me wrong, it's very beautiful and very suitable for the story. It's just not very usual, especially nowadays, so it needs a little bit of an adjustment, but that happens eventually. I gave this novella 4 stars. Now, after I finished this novella, I actually moved on to the buddy read, the first book from the series, The Curse of the Mistwright, and I think I'm currently at about 50%. I am enjoying the book so much. It's very intriguing. It's the quintessential fantasy, and it has so much depth I can't even begin to explain. But we'll talk about it more during the live show after I finish the book, and I'm also going to discuss it in my February wrap-up. So, to summarize, in the month of January, I read 6 books, which amounted to a total of 2,942 pages. In terms of genre, I read 1 classic, 2 fantasies, 1 mystery/thriller, and 2 science fictions. In terms of formatting, I read 4 paperbacks, 1 hardback, and 1 ebook, and in terms of sourcing, I owned 4 of the books and borrowed 2. So, in general, not a bad reading month, just very, very bad TBR reading month. But I think you should forgive me because, please? I'm pretty sure you don't care if I stick to my TBR, but in case you do, please accept my apologies and my promise that I'll do better in the future. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I hope you had a very, very nice January. Please let me know what was your favorite book you read during the month. Thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to see my crime and punishment reading experiment, check out this video. Bye!